In continuing this series demonstrating the true power of VBA, I have this Excel workbook that is a Door Prize Selector. So what you can do is essentially kind of spin a wheel and it will randomly change the selected cell to a number of names, and then it'll pick a winner for you. Now this workbook, it has a very basic setup where you put all the names in this column. You choose your colors that you would want the board to be made of right here, and essentially just the formatting of them. And then it'll put the winners here just for future reference. But this can be used with 300 names. It could be used with 30 names. It could be used with 1,000 names. That's where VBA comes in very powerful, because it can actually scale the board based on how many names there are. And then once it's scaled, you have your block, you click spin the wheel, and it will use the random generator to actually select random cells within this block. And then it'll start out fast at first, and then it'll slow down before finally picking a single cell. And then it'll tell you who the winner was. And then it actually clears that cell and records the winner for future references, but then you will have it and then you can run it again. And this is great for selecting door prizes or just drawing names out of a hat. And it kind of gives that game show feel of spinning through. So how does that work? So I'm going to go into my developer tab, into Visual Basic, and then I'm going to go into my board module, which is where most of the macros lie. The ribbon module is just where the ribbon calls these particular macros. And so I have the reset board. So that's actually going to be just clearing out the board. And so essentially it will actually clear it completely. So if I click reset board, I click play, it'll just clear my board and make sure that cursor's in the top left. And it also clear out my previous winners. Now the create board macro, that's where the actual tricky part of this entire macro happens. So the first thing is it has to get the names and it puts them into an array. And so it goes through and makes sure it's not a blank cell and make sure it's trimmed and it's not just a space. And then it'll actually give you a warning if there was no names that it found. The next thing it's going to do is going to pull the formatting, and so it's going to actually go through that column C and see if it has a format that's not Excel none. As long as it's not Excel none, then it will actually record that as a formatted cell. So you can actually have 20 different colors if you wanted to, and just as long as it's in that column C, it'll pick it up as a column to use. The next thing to do is I clear out the board just in case it hasn't been cleared out. So, and that just calls this to reset the board. Then I shuffle the names. So I put all the names into an array up here, and then I shuffle them. And all that does is it creates a temporary variant, and it just pulls each name and puts it into a random number or a random index of that array. So I just shuffle them up just so in case they're in alphabetical order, when it creates a board, they're not going to be. And so it'll shuffle them up. And then this is where the really make your money here. So this is the create the board. And so this is going to give me my column width. I start with 36 as my column width. And then I have to do some calculations because a row point is not the same value as a column point. So I have 15 here. Well, that's 8.43 here. Well, that's clearly longer than this. So I have to do some calculations over here to kind of reconcile the two. And so the actual height that I'm going to set it to is 15, but to get the actual, to make it kind of a square, I know I'm going to need a whole lot more rows than I do columns if I'm using 36. And so that's what this does here. And then I actually do a square root and to get a general idea of getting as close as I can to a square. And most of the time it's going to be a rectangle, but at least it'll be kind of a pleasantly viewing a rectangle. And then, so I get my total columns, total rows. So that's going to give me my grid based on how many names I have. And then I'm just going to go set all my column width to 36 and then my row height to 15 for that particular square grid. And then I'm just going to paste my names into them with a random color, because if I just choose a color, you might have a column of a single color. So I got to do the random on the color as well. And then it just scales it using the scale. So I scale the board based on the visible range. And so I just make sure, I know how many columns I have, I know how many rows I have, and I just make sure that those fit within the parameters of the visible range. And so once that's done, I have it all scaled. Then I just select A and then it's good to go. And so to show you that, create board, I click create, and then it created my board for me. And it is random every single time. All these names are in a completely different random set. And like I said, I can make this work for any number of names. So if say I have 320 something here, I can delete those and then I go back to the board, click create board, and it's a much smaller group this time. And that's the true power of VBA is like I'm using VBA to actually ignore blank cells and things like that and calculate all the different how big of a range I need to fit this and based on a square or close enough to a square to make this work. And so and I've also added more buttons here just to clear it up. So say like, the scale got wrong, I can just click the scale button and it'll actually bring it back to that scale, whatever I need. And same works if I'm actually too far zoomed in, I can scale the board and to get back to where I'm at. And so the last button is the spin the wheel. That's the magic of this particular workbook. So that is a macro that's called spin the wheel. And essentially I make sure I'm on the right tab and then I make sure that it has value because if you try to spin the wheel when there's no data, your Excel will actually crash because it'll just keep on going and going and going. And so I put all of the cells and values into an array just because that makes it go faster. And then I randomize and choose my first one that I'm going to choose. And then I tell it how many spins, which is also going to be randomly counted between 50 and 90. And the reason to do that is just because so you can not guarantee it's 50 every single time. And I start my delay at 0.01 seconds. And so I can set this to anything, but that's where the delay between selecting cells is going to start at 10 milliseconds. And then it'll exponentially get close or more and more in delay in between. That's how it starts out really fast and then it slows down. And essentially all I do is make sure here that the cell I'm selecting isn't blank. And so essentially if the random index come back as a blank cell, I just tell it, give me another random index. And then I'm actually going to select the cell, do events just to make sure it shows it to the user, and then I'm going to delay it. And this is to get an exponential slowdown. So it starts really fast and then slows down in between each selection. That's what I multiply it by 1.08 every single time until it gets to 0.6. Once it gets to 0.6 or more, I'm just going to exit out of there, even if it hasn't reached my total 50, which typically that gets to 0.6 somewhere around then. Now the final stop is going to be where I select my winner and then I just clear the content. So I'm going to clear the winner once he's selected. Don't need him in the board anymore. So I clear it out and then load my form winner, which just loads the name. So just to show you how that works, spin the wheel. And it is going to select. And there it is. Selected my winner. Click OK. Go back to the setup. Just note it does have my winner there, just so if I ever have to reference back to it, cleared there. And to demonstrate another use case for this, and I've used this with my kids before, like you don't necessarily have to do names for door prize. It could just be any kind of activity. And like these are chores around the house. So I click create board and then it knows to actually scale it down. I just click spin the wheel and then you can divvy up chores randomly through this. And it's a fun way to do that. So that's my little fun VBA project. That's a door prize selector. I hope you like it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.